Welcome to More Than Our Story, where we strive to inspire through sharing our stories. I'm Daniel Height, and today I'm joined by Lori LeBay, a speaker and educator who has dedicated herself to raising awareness of Alzheimer's and dementia through her work as the founder of Alzheimer's Speaks, an advocacy group providing education and support for those dealing with this terrible disease. She's also the co-founder of Dementia Map, a resource directory for family members, caregivers, and professionals alike. Lori, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Daniel. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Me too. Just at the onset of the show, I think it would be very helpful for you to clarify for the listeners the distinction between dementia as an umbrella term and Alzheimer's as a disease. Can you help clarify that distinction, please?
Sure. First of all, it's dementia that's the umbrella term and is actually a category and not a formal disease. And then underneath that umbrella falls Alzheimer's, Lewy body, vascular. There's over like 100 of them. But those are probably the most common ones that we hear about. So I always say dementia is like the term cancer. There's many, many different forms of cancer. So that's the category, or it's like a cold where, some people have a cough, some people have a headache, some people have aches and pains and things like that. So dementia is the category, and that's the most common term used. Alzheimer's disease itself has, people think of memory loss, but it's executive function where maybe they can't map out their life anymore calendar wise. A lot of times math is one of the first things to go. As the disease progresses, they may not recognize who you are when they're talking to you. Lewy body, they have a lot of hallucinations, but they're on their game most of the time and people can't tell. But inside, they say that their mind's just, kind of buzzing 1,200 different directions. But they can have issues with temperature. The body temperature isn't the same as it used to be in terms of regulating that. Sleep patterns. So every single disease is a little bit different. Vascular, we usually think of, hardening of the arteries, maybe smokers, but you don't have to be. But dealing more with that blood pressure and or blood flow and getting it to the brain. And so you really have to be careful when you get a diagnosis too, because a lot of doctors out there still think it's just Alzheimer's, which you would think that would be gone by now, but it's not. And you have to, when you do get a diagnosis, remember it could change. So just like with cancer, it may have started in one spot and then spread to others. With dementia, they may have diagnosed you with like mild cognitive, now all of a sudden I'm going crazy, mild cognitive impairment, which is MCI, which is kind of a precursor, meaning you might get a formal dementia. But some people never go on to get an actual diagnosis of dementia. But the one thing that people really don't talk about, doctors included, is you could get multiple forms or your type of dementia or your diagnosis could change. And your symptoms may even seem to be the same. Many times, you'll see a difference. Maybe people will start hallucinating, like with Lewy body, or having really bad dreams. And that's kind of a trigger point there. But this is it's a very hard thing to diagnose. And like when my mom died, she lived with it for 30 years. We were always told it was Alzheimer's, but we had a brain autopsy and found out she had some Parkinson's and Lewy body. And we didn't really see major signs of those things, but I think they might have hit a little bit later in her disease process. So we weren't aware of them.
So you just touched upon something interesting. There's no singular factor in receiving a diagnosis of one of these types of dementia. Is perhaps you could inform the audience about some of the factors considered and what healthcare professionals are typically involved in this process?
Well, you always need a referral from your primary, and primaries will give it, but they're just not on top of the game. I mean, because the industry is changing so much. So they used to like diagnose it by a little test, draw a clock, and then we'll tell if you're getting the hands in the right position or in the right placement, to say it's 2:15. That was a real easy thing that doctors used to do. Now there's tests that the neuropsych tests that they'll do that are quite extensive. Um, they're usually 3 to 4 hours, and you usually have two of them. And they can really overwhelm, in my opinion, someone in the later stages where it's evident that something major is wrong, and it can be devastating for not only them but for the family if they can't complete those things. Um, you hear President Trump talk about he passed his cognitive test, his 3-word test, that's part of it. But there are so many other pieces with it in terms of answering questions and doing graphics and things like that. They have a blood test now, they say, is out that uh, can diagnose Alzheimer's disease or the potential for you to get it. There's spinal taps, there's um, PET scans. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, so I don't dive into it too much, but those are just kind of some of the primary ones that are out there. Um, and some of them focus just on plaques and tangles in the brain, which I personally have a really tough time with that one, um, just because there was a nun study that proved you could have plaques and tangles and still not have any symptoms, and vice versa. Um, and that was called the nun study years ago. But that's still a big, big factor of what it is. But it's really a baby disease. It's only been around about 100 years. And again, everyone's knowledge level is different. So I always recommend try to get a referral to a neurologist who specifically works in the arena of dementia. Because some of them will be sleep. And I mean, there's lots of different types of neurologists, but most of us don't even know what a neurologist is till we need one, and then you don't know their subcategories. So ask for a neurologist. They will be more on top of their game. And then, like any medical professional, make sure you feel comfortable with them. And if you don't, ask to see another one, because you have to have open communication and feel like you're being heard when it comes to your symptoms and your care.
Absolutely. You do need to feel careful, comfortable.
Yeah, because that'll make or break your process, in your belief in what's possible or what's not. And we still get a lot of doctors telling people, get your affairs in order, which all of us, in my opinion, once we're 18, should have our affairs in order with the healthcare directive and a power of attorney and a will. Many people we are seeing getting diagnosed younger. So everyone always thought this was an old person's disease. You don't have to worry about it till you're 65. And really, it's the 85-year-olds that are going to get this. And we're seeing people in their 50s, in their 40s, and even younger. And, kids can get this, dogs can get this, but we don't hear about that as much. And part of it is because the doctors, many of them still have the belief that it's an older person's disease, so they don't go down that path. Common things are, when you have brain change, people are like, you're depressed, or you're going through a midlife crisis. Those are right two of them. I mean, people have gotten divorced over not being diagnosed correctly, because it's just had such a strain on their relationship and stuff. So it's a tricky disease. You have to give everybody a little grace in this, but many times, and I talk with people all over the world, they still say it takes 2 to 3 years to get a formal diagnosis once they get into a neurologist. And, those wait lists are long. So get in there sooner than later, get that referral.
And it's not strictly an older person's disease. You just alluded to the fact that your mother struggled with it for 30 years. How did that shape your advocacy journey?
Totally. I didn't know anything about it, so it's like, and then, so she started having symptoms in her mid-50s. She lived till 86. And there was nothing for us. I mean, we went to the doctor, and the doctor told her literally for 10 years of this process, it's menopause. Dorothy, it's just menopause. And my mom would go, this ain't my girlfriend's menopause. We talk about her symptoms. Mine are different, and she knew. And so I count those 10 years because in that 30. And so she wasn't formally diagnosed for 30, but upon autopsy, the neurologist, who is a good friend of mine, I mean, he gasped when he saw how atrophied or shrunk her brain was. And he's like, I've never seen a brain like this. And he's been doing this since the 70s. And he goes, but Lori, you are right. She was living with it that long because the way her brain is affected. And he said, I know you got a lot of pushback from people on this, but you're correct. She definitely was living with it this long. So, follow your gut and keep pushing forward with things. My mom used the term Alzheimer's. We didn't even know where she got that from. She wasn't a big computer person. It wasn't something that was talked about back then. She's been gone since 2014. But she knew her body. She knew something was off. And then when she got diagnosed, it was the typical, here's a prescription, here's an appointment, get your affairs in order, and you walk out the door with like no resources. And I just thought, going through this, where are the other people like us? I don't think she's the only person in the world experiencing this, and so where are the services, products, and tools, and where are the other peeps that we can talk to? And, over the years, I just didn't see that happening. And I worked in real estate at the time, and my primary focus was the senior market. And it was the housing directors and the social workers that then, I was friends with, heard about my stories with my mom, and they were like, Lori, you need to switch careers and be over here. And then I learned about the Alzheimer's Association, but that was the only one. And they said, you're about living graciously alongside this disease. You're not about, give me money and, go to a walk type deal. You're giving people real life ideas of how do you survive every day with a chronic illness that affects more than just the person diagnosed. And I think that's one of the big struggles that most families have. It's like, what about us over here? We're feeling this too. We want to be supportive, but and I would imagine same with cancer. It's a team game. I mean, you're taking the brunt of it and you're the one getting the hits, but there's a lot of other hits that the team takes, when they see their teammate being ill and having symptoms and side effects. And I mean, the list goes on and on and on, as you know.
So I would assume that's directly what led you to found Alzheimer's Speaks.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the platform and how it got started, really?
Sure. So again, my friends were the ones that encouraged me, and I'm like, what do I know? I am a daughter. I have no medical background. You know, and I thought, okay, I'll try a blog. And I didn't really even know what a blog was at the time, and so I started writing little articles, pushing them out to the internet. And I'm a local girl. I don't travel worldwide. I didn't really travel the US, and all of a sudden I'm talking to people all around the world and going, wow, there's a huge need and no one is filling this gap of meeting the family need on the level that I thought they needed. So I decided, I prayed on it a lot, and I decided to take my life savings and my retirement, and I'm going to make a difference, big or small. I don't know. I had no idea what it was going to look like, but I knew that I wanted to raise the voice of those diagnosed, family and friends, trying to support them, as well as the professionals and the advocates. I wanted to use multimedia, which no one really was doing these virtual videos and things like that. I mean, that we were still at the PowerPoints of the talking heads with the slides going by. And I thought, this is just asinine. I'm tired of seeing people peek through the window and then deciding what's going on in the house instead of just knocking on the door and having a conversation about what are your real needs. So, we used multimedia. I started the first official, we called it a radio, which was really podcast, but I was on Blog Talk Radio, so that's what I thought it was, until it was like, no, radio's the sponsored things. And I had people who wanted to sponsor, but I mean, you have to raise like $150,000, and I couldn't do an hour-long show, and I could get a half an hour, but 10 minutes of that was going to be advertising. So I was really clear that I wanted to be also a good service of how I spend my money and how I showcase people's stories. And so it's just kind of grown from there. I do training. We have different types of videos that people can find. We have one whole section that is just free educational resources. So that's actual tools that they can download. There's interviews that I do on Alzheimer Speaks podcast where I interview people around the world. There's dementia chats where I facilitate a conversation with people with dementia. So insightful. Oh my gosh, you learn so much from these, and they're wonderful for those diagnosed, for families and professionals. And then we have Dementia in the Arts, where we interview people living with dementia who do art. And we're told, well, they can't learn that. They can't, that's out of the realm. So many things are squashed. And we seem to focus on what people can't do instead of enabling and encouraging them to do what they can do. And so people are kind of shocked at that. There's information on dementia-friendly communities and memory cafes, which are support groups for both people with dementia and their care partners. And, that was a concept I learned about overseas. And they were like, here, take it. I mean, no charge, just go for it. And so I, tried to spread the word. There's lots of them out there now. You can go to our site and get a referral to one of the main resource directories for those. And everything's not listed because you can only reach so many people, but those are life-saving for families. I mean, to be able to connect with peers, some are online, some are in-person meetings, but just having a peer base, I would imagine that's been helpful for you in your journey, talking with people that really get it. You don't have to hide anything. You can be yourself. You can, if you're having a symptom you're dealing with, everybody just understands it, or if you're a little off of your game because you've had chemo or you've had a nightmare with dementia and Lewy body and are hallucinating, everyone just gets it and is accepting of it. And, we don't feel that out in society so much, I don't think.
No, it's you touched on something there, the being able to speak with people that understand what it is. Really, it's a very powerful bond that can't really be replicated. I want to talk about your Dementia Map, which you also co-founded. Why did you create it, and who's it aimed at helping?
It's aimed at helping everyone, and it was a dream of mine since we were having issues with my mom. I mean, I was really angry, like, why aren't larger organizations who have the money, why haven't they created this? This is asinine. And I mean, I was really angry. It was like, this is what people need. They need to connect to services, products, and tools. But what I found was there's a lot of resource directories, and here's a list of the nonprofits, here's a list of the for-profits, here's a list of the medical things. And it's like, and people who lived with the disease weren't considered knowledgeable. And that just ticked me off. It was just like, they are living and dealing with this 24/7. And you don't think I mean, there was, in my opinion, that information was not valued. And I wanted to create a resource directory that was open to everything, because families need it all. You need choice, and I think you have a right to choice. So I, when I had Alzheimer's Speaks, which I mean I still do, I used to have a resource directory that I made that wasn't, it was pretty deep, but it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't easy to maneuver. And I was still new at having a website on that level and things. And then I was approached by some guys who talked with Joe Gogler at the University of Minnesota, and they wanted to do a resource directory. And Joe's like, if you're going to do it, you got to talk with Lori because she's so knowledgeable with people around the world. But we worked for like 2.5 years, and it didn't go anywhere. And it was a lot of work, and it was, it looked pretty, but it wasn't functional. And after that period of time, and I mean, these are people that really knew what they were doing, but they were, and I love them to death, but they were kind of hell bent on having something proprietary instead of using what already exists and just putting it in a package. I mean, I wasn't worried about, okay, we're going to put this together and then we're going to sell them. We're going to make millions of dollars. My attitude is I just want to help people, and let's get it out there as fast as we can. So I got frustrated with that. I finally backed off after about 2.5 years. Dave Wiedrich, who at that time had the Memory Cafe directory, which is now run by Dementia Friendly America, reached out to me listening to my shows and said, hey, why don't we do this together? And I said, I can't. I said, I'm drained. I gave so much. And he's like, no, Lori, will you just explain to me? And I said, Dave, I said, okay, I will tell you my vision, but only if you can commit to 110%, because I can't take any less than that to get this off in the ground. And he's like, this is brilliant. And in 5 months, Dave made the site. And, and that was over COVID, and we just grow organically because this is, our, it's our resources and our funding behind this. We don't have grants. We don't have big pharma behind us. But we wanted control to say who can be on here and who can't, so we vet everybody, but in a light fashion, because it's like there's not this hard and fast criteria like, are you a nurse, are you a doctor, are you a professor at a university? It's like, no, what is your knowledge base, and more important to me, what's your heart base? Where are you coming from, and what do you have to offer? And so we have a little bit of everybody. We have like 150 categories. We have and you can search the resource directory by keywords, by categories, by location, or just going through all the thumbnails. We have a glossary of terms because, as you know, probably, you don't know what you don't know till you don't know it. And then you're like, and then you Google and it gets so overwhelming, and you go from one click to another. And what I found so often was you just need a short summary, and then if you want to go off from there, but sometimes you don't need to read a whole manual because like dementia, I'm sure cancer is very similar. Every person reacts different, their body, their family, their social structure, their finances, their religion, all of those things come into play in terms of your care choices or your beliefs and your needs. And so I wanted people to have choice, and I wanted stuff that was free, so everyone can access this site for free. And we don't ask people to even set up an account, because one of the things that I hear all the time is, I'm so sick of having to fill out all this information, have another password to remember, and now all of a sudden everybody's pinging me, because I'm money bait to them. And we didn't want to do that. So, we don't have the pop-up bots, which I personally get really frustrated with. We just let people explore on their own, because I personally think it's really important for us to be our own advocates. And not that we know everything, but I think it's good for us to have a solid base of what's available and what works and what doesn't from others. And We have a calendar, which is very slim. It was used more, but I think with all the staffing issues and stuff now, people just don't have the time for it. We've got some great articles, and we're just building out, and it's really by word of mouth. We're not buying lists and just plugging people in, because we want you to actually have someone who's going to answer. And I don't know if you found that, but there's a lot of stuff out there, and it's like, hey, ding-a-ling-a-ling, I called or I emailed a week ago and I still haven't heard, and you keep pinging, and it's like no response. We're hoping that we will do better than that on Dementia Map.
I want to touch back on something you mentioned. Being your own advocate, people that have the disease. You have a webinar series, Dementia Chats, where people with the experts featured actually have been diagnosed with some form of dementia themselves. That's an incredible concept. Can you maybe illuminate where that idea came from?
To me, it was just common sense. It was like, why is nobody doing this? I mean, that's really all it was common sense. Like, you can't fix a problem if you don't know the issues. And too often I heard comments from doctors and professionals, and I'm like, that is not real life. You really don't have a clue what this is. You have the right to write a prescription, but you really do not, and do my testing, but you really don't understand this disease and the impact. And we have a great video by who was ended up being a really good friend, Suska, and she had a mom with dementia. And I met her at a event I was doing with Maria Shriver, and she happened to have gone on Alzheimer's Speaks website, and she did this beautiful, beautiful testimony for us that just kind of came out of nowhere. And if I remember the numbers correctly, she said, I learned so much. I binged watched these for 14 hours. I mean, that's the power behind them. And she's like, and these people were fabulous, because again, it cuts through the stigma of what people are supposed to be. And with Alzheimer's and any form of dementia, a lot of times people go right to, oh, wheelchair, can't communicate, you're drooling, you don't know who anybody is. And they're talking and they're coming out with these ideas, or they talk about how they adapt, which is just so helpful to so many. And also, I think their strong message is there's no right way to do this. And what works today might not work tomorrow or 15 minutes from now. You might want to adapt it. You might want to try it exactly how you did it and see if it works again, because that's real life, or you might want to move on and it's time for something else.
Speaking of real life, you earlier in the episode, you were talking about something you learned overseas. I
Mhm,
think you're referring to the memory cafe concept.
mhm.
Originally, I think it was in the Netherlands in the late 90s. You were responsible for launching one of the first memory cafes in the US, Arthur's Memory Cafe. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I wasn't in contact with people in the Netherlands. I learned about it through Norm McNamara, living with dementia in the UK. And he just talked about, how this helped he and his wife and how much fun they were. And what you find, I think, so often with a chronic illness is life changes due to the illness, but life changes due to your social circles and people feeling uncomfortable being around you. They don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. And so they walk away. And there's this isolation that occurs that is so sad, because a lot of times the people that walk away don't really want to, but no one's told them how to help, you know?
Um,
And there will be some people that are just going to walk away because it's too much work and they're not an emotional type person. And, they don't want to address those things, or they're grief at that process or uncomfortable not being able to do something just right, And so when I learned about them, they just gifted everything. They rewrote the words, they took their S's and put our Z's back in and and changed some of the titles for basic things. But they were totally funded over there. I mean, they had a prime minister for dementia. We don't have anything like that in our government. And so there was funding, and they would do grassroots things. And so I was always impressed with norms. And so, they helped guide me. And I reached out to a lot of different organizations. And, one of our largest said, well, you can't do that. You can't have them together. Why can't I have, spouses together or family members with their loved one? Well, that's just not going to work. The things they talk about. And I'm like, we need to be able to have those tough conversations together. And why not do it in a supportive arena, where other people will come in with different ideas and validate what's going on and how to move through it. And I think we were so used here to, oh, the poor caregiver. Well, hello, the patient is going through way more than what we are, and that needs to be brought to the table too, because even like with my broken arm, minor thing, but I needed help. I just am able to drive now. I Sometimes I was kind of, I'll just say the word bitchy, because they weren't doing it the way I wanted them to do it. I was impatient. And that's a true thing that happens when you're not used to having people do things for you. And for most people who get sick, that is the start of feeling like you've lost your independence, or they want to do it because they can do it faster, and kind of taking things away from us sometimes. And they're trying to be helpful, but it doesn't feel helpful always to the patient. So I just love the memory cafes. They say they're a lifeline. I've mentored many around the country. I never looked at like, oh, I'm going to own this thing. And I would tell people, you can use the term memory cafe, but don't you dare try to trademark it. It was a gift, because I don't want to see the karma come back on you. Let's just work together. And there's no one way to do them, because every community is different and has different needs. So we started out doing it like they did, where they would have a little bit of education and they would have treats and then you'd talk. Well, our group said, and this is what I loved and I encouraged from them to hear, they said, can you just give us a list of these educational programs in our community? Because we need stuff on other days too, instead of duplicating what's out there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how did none of us ever see that? But everybody's duplicating instead of working together. And so we got rid of the educational part, and then we just incorporated our treats with our talks. Some of them will split out the people with dementia and the family members and do two different groups. The ones that I do, we've always kept people together, and we've done it both online and in person. Right now, I just have an online one since COVID, and they fought tooth and nail going online, because they thought they wouldn't be able to have the in-depth relationship they had with people in person, and they were all shocked. And when COVID was over, I said, "Do you want to go back to meeting?" And they were like, "No," because it was easier. If their person with dementia was having a difficult day, they could still meet, or the person could be in the background and join them later, and they didn't have the stress of having to get ready, because sometimes that's physically and emotionally exhausting, getting ready to go out, and people don't understand that. So there are ones that are music oriented, education oriented. Some do things with agriculture. I mean, there's like no end to what these can be. But our group just said, we want to have our peer conversation. And if we would have a guest speaker, we would meet for typically an hour and a half to 2 hours. They would say, no, they can't have more than 20 minutes, because we want our talk time,
Right.
And the friendships are like instantaneous. And it helped. Like one woman called and said, my mom and dad are going to come, if that's okay. My dad's got dementia. He's kind of earlier stages. But my mom really wants to come. My dad has fought it because we can't even say the words because my dad's in such denial. We can't say the term Alzheimer's or dementia. She's like, so I don't know what for you to expect, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Everything went fine. They were happy. They said they were coming back. The next day, the woman calls me in the evening and says, and she was just in tears, and she goes, I can't thank you enough for the memory cafe. And I said, oh, that's so wonderful to hear. Can you tell me why? And she said, well, like I told you, my dad was in total denial. She said, and that has changed everything for him, his perception of what the disease is like once he met other people. She said, I stopped over there. I was going to meet a college friend or high school friend that she hadn't seen in 20 years. And she had told her folks she was going to go meet with so-and-so. And her dad remembered that person. And so she said, well, do you want to come with us? And she said he came with us, and he really didn't even want to go out of the house anymore. You know, he just was depressed. And who isn't when they get a chronic illness, you know? And she said he wouldn't shut up talking about the memory cafe and talking about Alzheimer's and dementia. And she's like, it's gone. And I have my dad back. And it was like, oh, wow. But, you know, the power of people in connection, we have to amplify it, not downplay it. And to me, you know, people always ask, what's the most important thing you can do? And again, I've not research based. I've just lived and walked this path for a very long time. And people can say exercise and food and, you know, but we've had people that have never drank and have eaten, you know, clean all their lives and done triathlons, and they still get dementia, you know, so there's no guarantee. But I'm about quality of life. And I think life is much more worth living when you're connected to others and you have fun and you feel like you have a sense of community. And even in the blue zones, you know, they talk about what they eat and blah, blah, blah. But it's like it's their gatherings. They have a sense of purpose in life. I mean, to me, that is just a common sense thing that it hasn't been studied to the level it needs to be, because big pharma's making money off the drugs, you know, and we don't like change. So we do what we've always done, and we have trained society to want a pill to fix it instead of what can we do and be responsible about the cards we're dealt with. And not that it can't be together, but it's, you know, to me, it's been kind of one-sided in terms of how it's viewed, and that is changing. There are becoming more studies. They're smaller on social connections, and there's a lot having to do with dance, with music, with painting, with all kinds of things that they're seeing a difference. And I think that's incredible. I mean, when I'm around people that I love and I feel connected with, you know, my spirit is lifted. I mean, it's just as simple as that, you know. And when your spirit is lifted, you feel better about life and yourself and in your future, I think.
Elaborating on the value of connections, memory cafes have expanded it in the broader sense to something called a dementia-friendly community. Can you talk about
Yeah. Well, dementia-friendly communities, I learned about them kind of at the same time. So I was lucky enough to launch the first one here in the US as well. And I just thought, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we supporting dementia? And so again, I talked with a lot of organizations and they just thought I was crazy. And then I talked with one man who was the executive director for the Lutheran Home Association. And he met with me like once a month for, I bet it was 6 months, because he thought it was a cool concept. But, you know, organizations hear a lot of cool concepts, but they're just a thought and then they go away. And, you know, what are you really going to do with it if I say yes? So he finally realized I was not backing down on this thing. And so he invited me to meet with his staff. And he cut me off about 15 minutes in, and my heart just sunk. And I'm like, oh, I screwed it up. I lied. I mean, that's what my head was doing. I blew it. I blew it. and and he could tell, I'm sure, from the expression on my face, because I felt it so deeply. And he's like, Lori, you can stop the sales pitch. Look around. They're all on board. And it was like, oh, and so and this, we ended up doing it not in Minnesota where I live, but in Wisconsin. And it was brilliant. They worked to the ground, and they invited all kinds of businesses, and then physicians, neurologists, community, like the bank, the mayor, and then families and service providers to this big kickoff we had. And I did like a keynote. It was probably about 2 hours long, actually. And I talked about what's going on in the rest of the world. People were shocked. It's like, well, they're doing that. I mean, nobody here was doing 90% of what they were doing overseas, because we have this attitude that we're American, we do everything the best and we do it first. And, it was some of that stuff. And so people came together and saw how huge this need was, and realized, and to this day, every 3 seconds, someone is getting diagnosed with dementia. I mean, that's a massive statistic. And so we're not running away from it. And if it's you or a family member or a neighbor or a coworker or a friend, sooner or later, you're going to get hit, and why not be prepared? And what's good for dementia is good for everybody, because it's just about kindness. It's about being inclusive. It's, again, to me, a real common sense process, and no community has to do things the same. And it starts with education, and Dementia Friendly America does what they call Dementia Friends now, which is great. But I think we have to go so much deeper in terms of resources and education and connection with people, and people changing how they do business, talking to somebody, giving them eye contact, being inclusive of the patient. A lot of times they would just talk with the caregiver, and they wouldn't even have a conversation. And then the caregiver is really upset, like, why aren't you, I mean, that's just rude. That's just rude. There's no other word for it. And so people were firing people that they had worked with for years because they didn't understand, and they discounted their loved one who was sitting right there. So there's just so many different ways we can help people. And it's endless, and it's kind of a creative portal. Like, there's no wrong. If you want to help people and be kinder, go for it. You don't need a green light from anyone. Just step up and do it, like you're doing, with your podcast. It's like, stop waiting for permission to be kind.
What do you see right now as some of the biggest hurdles in dementia care?
Well, with our aging population, which I'm 66, our numbers are huge. And as we're seeing, we don't have the staff. And we don't have staff that are educated, and we don't have staff that stay. And then, of course, there's the financial cost. I've been looking for a loved one, and dementia care here in Minnesota, you're easy $9,000 to $10,000 a month, period. And that's the low end. That's not the high end. That's the low end. And it's a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford that. And there's a 5-year look back. So if money hasn't been spent properly, you can't even apply for medical assistance, or you'll be denied. If you get young onset, that's still very difficult for them to get disability funding. But it has changed in the last 10 years. But again, it's still, everything's so much more difficult, in my opinion, than it needs to be, and so stressful. So we do have CMS, who does Medicare and Medicaid, has launched the Dementia Guide. And when they launched it, and I've been very critical of them, and they know this, and they're improving. But when they launched it, it's like, well, nobody knows about it. So what good's that going to do if you got, all this money sitting here and people don't know that they can apply for it? And what it was, how it first was marketed sounded like it would be doctors would be referring to outside services like mine and so many others. What it really turned into was, and I interviewed several people on this, was the doctors were so excited to learn about adult day for respite. They didn't even know about respite care. And so they were all excited, and I'm like, well, good luck with that. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, most of them closed during COVID, or they have shorter hours that don't really meet the family's needs anymore. But they are starting, and they only had 90 of them in the whole country. And then they didn't list them on the site. And I'm like, come on, you guys, you got to help us here. And so in July, they're going to be launching more. And I checked the other day, and there's actually more out there already. But they were going to launch another like 400. But they also realized they needed to fund the infrastructure and setup. And these organizations are going to be navigators. So maybe once a month you can meet with them. Some of them are offering support groups. They have to have a hotline. So all of that stuff is really good. I still don't think they are even close to connecting to services, products, and tools. And like many, and again, businesses, is they want to be proprietary and they just want to do it all. And again, what they're doing is fantastic. It's not fantastic enough. It's not big picture enough for me. And I would love to see that changed, and I will continue to lift up and state where I don't see it's working either. I mean, because it's not going to change if we don't say it doesn't meet the needs. It's not going to change if we don't scream loud enough and say, nobody knows about it. You need to market. You need to market. I mean, and I saw that over and over the years. I would get people who would get grants, and they would devise these great tools or services, and then nobody knew about them because in the grants there was no marketing money. And it was just like, so then they would let that go, and they would apply for another grant, and they'd come up with a great idea, and I'd have them on the show again. And it was, and again, some of that has changed, but man, we are slow at change. We are slow at change.
So what would you say to those caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's or some form of dementia?
Don't give up. There is way, way more support out there than you have ever even imagined. And the kinds of things that are available are unreal. And you may see a need, and you might be like me, and you might not jump in on the level I did, but there are people who have written books, they've done videos on YouTube, they have Instagram accounts, they have created a Facebook group, which a lot of people are like, oh, they can't do the computer. Yeah, not everybody can, but a lot of them can. And there are people who have been living with dementia for 20 years who are still in charge of Zoom meetings, so do what you feel needs to be done. Get creative, offer. And when you create something, I think it's very healing, because for me, and I didn't realize this when I was doing this, but initially, but it's like, why would I not want to share this and help somebody along so they don't have to go through the level of pain or kind of pain, or whatever it is that I went through? Why can't we share what we know? Because there's still so much that needs to be done, and it's changing every single day. So there's people my age that have created cool things, but now they're retiring, and no one's covering it, or some of them are, but not all. um and Lance A. Slatton just took over for All's Authors, which is a collective of authors, over 400, that have written books specifically on this. So now on All Home Cares Matters, they are taking that over. but a lot of them just go by the wayside. And again, All's Authors was created really by 3 women that wrote books on this. That was the writing for them themselves, they'll say, was very healing, but now it's helped others, which is even more healing. So we've had kids, Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, that have done really cool things. A Girl Scout did a kind of a legacy piece, and what was interesting is she and her best friend both had relatives with dementia, but they never told one another. And for some reason, through a project, one of them mentioned a grandparent. And then they joined up and they did this really cool legacy thing that people could do. Another Boy Scout, for his Eagle Scout, he got like $10,000 in funding, and he ended up working with a master carpenter in a senior living where his grandma lived with dementia in the memory care. And he helped him build this huge freshwater fish tank. And then he partnered and mentored with a owner of freshwater fish, someone who sold them. And it was like, what a cool thing. And then he couldn't give it away because the maintenance is like $200 a month. And then he finally found someone to take it. And but everybody at every age can participate. There's no wrong. There's just no
So,
wrong.
if you're concerned about yourself or a loved one, what's your first step?
First step is, if you're ready to go to the doctor, go to your doctor, but then ask for a referral. And know that you might get a doctor like my mom that says it's just hormones, or it's a midlife crisis, or you're depressed. And it might be, some symptoms can be taken care of when you get rid of stress, when you sleep all night, when you eat better, when you're hydrated. Those are very simple things that we can adjust to. And the doctor should be weaning those out first. And then typically you go into the depression, and you also analyze medications. Mixed medications can cause, some great side effects. So they should be starting there. I think a lot more are going to start with the blood test. And it's like, I I have issues with the blood test too, because how is that information going to be used? If it's a precursor in your genetics, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. But how is that data going to be used? Chances are it's going to increase your insurance rates. Is it going to affect your driving privilege? I mean, there's a lot of stuff. If you need a medical review for a job, that could affect. I mean, there's a lot of things no one's talking about with those blood tests. And the older I get, the more skeptical I am. And I see all these data breaches. How is this stuff going to be used? I don't think it's always for us in our best interests. And so, and people have done the DNA testing. Like there was one woman who wrote a book, and I can't remember her name offhand, but she thought she might have MS, and she came back fine for that, but she had Alzheimer's. She had the gene for that, and she was devastated. And so people were doing these DNA tests, and they weren't getting any counseling with it. And she talked about the severity of her depression and wanting to commit suicide. And I mean, we need to support people through what does this mean, and what can life look like, and is this even real? I mean, we all know people who have been misdiagnosed, and so in allowing people that time to grieve and process it, because if we don't, it's always going to be there. It's just not going to be talked about, and that's not healthy. And I think that can progress the disease itself too, when we don't feel heard and we don't feel we can be our authentic selves.
Lori, speaking about being heard, your advocacy and education have undoubtedly helped countless people dealing with dementia and their families and their loved ones and their caregivers. You've removed the stigma that far too often silences the voices of those who suffer from these diseases. And you've allowed them to feel heard, valued, and inspired. I just want to thank you for sharing your story today and keep doing what you're doing because you are an inspiration. You're doing so much good for so many people.
Well, thank you. It was a privilege and an honor, and I love talking about it because I think so often we don't think we're able to do anything, and we are, you know. Uh, Get rid of some of these boundaries, that say you gotta be, a professional. A lot of these professionals have never had the lived experience. The lived experience is massive, and if you're real close to it or you're far away and an observer, all of those conversations are important. Even if you don't agree with them, they are still perceptions that exist and that we need to deal with if we're going to go forward. And everything I'm doing with dementia, this can be replicated in any disease. You know, it's just it's just about giving people grace and listening and making changes and raising voices and validating one another. I mean, it's just a simple, I think, but kind process that we all matter and we all deserve good care and feeling a sense of community.
Well, that's something you've definitely given people.
Well, Daniel, I think it's just incredible the work that you're doing, and I think it's going to empower so many other people who are diagnosed. If it's cancer or something else, one of the things that I loved when you said, "Hey, you want to come on the show," is it shows the overlap of care. Care is care is care is care. And granted, you got to tweak it for this and that, but it's kind of like raising a kid or getting married. There are more commonalities than differences. And we need to get people back on that path of, instead of looking for what's different and saying it's bad, learn their story, because we can learn from one another. And people who are different from us can give us brilliant ideas to live better. And the more we raise the good, the more we're going to see. The more we elevate the negative, the more we're going to see and feel. So, what do you want in your life? I want, especially at my age, I want calm and peace and love. I want people to get along. I want people to feel cared for. And I want people to know how to care for others. And I think we've lost some of that. So keep up what you're doing. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much.